Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We have a few minutes until we get started. So if you would like to take this time to pop into the chat, let everyone know where you're from and, you know, uh, what your name is, where you're from, where you're joining us from today. Okay. We are at 12, but I'm still going to give a minute or two because we seem like a really full house. Let everyone jump in, give their location, their agency, or their business.
We do still have quite a few people joining, Director.
Yes, I'm going to give it a few minutes. It looks like it's really filling up. I would take this opportunity, and I may repeat myself because, as my colleague Amanda mentioned, we are still having people filter in. I would like everyone to know that they are being recorded for this training, so it can be made available after today's presentation. For those of you filtering in, pop into the chat. Let us know where you're from.
I can see you now, Julie. Thank you.
Hello, Julie. Okay, it seems like we've slowed down a little bit with admissions, but we will be working together. My colleague Amanda Martin will be letting people in as the training progresses for anyone who's joining a few minutes after. But to respect everyone's time, I'd like to get started. I will repeat for those of us just joining. I'd like if everyone jumped into the chat, said where they're from. We'll be using the chat interactively throughout this training today. I'll start by introducing myself. Oh, one other thing, we are recording this session so we can make it available on our platforms and to share with everyone after the presentation. So I would like to let everyone know, of course, that they're being recorded. So I am Caroline Griffin. I'm the Director of Fair Housing and Commercial Property at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and I will be your trainer for this afternoon. I'm joined by Amanda Martin, who is my colleague at PHRC. She is offering us our technical support today, supporting me in facilitating this training, as well as monitoring the chat for any questions. Best way is to hold our questions till the end of the presentation. We try to allow some time for people to be able to share questions, but feel free to pop them into the chat and we will keep track of them between myself and Amanda. I would like to also thank our ASL interpreters, our captioners. If you have any needs that require captioning, there's a link in the chat. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat and we'll work to assist you. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome everyone to our presentation, Fair Housing and Hoarding Disorder. This is our May presentation of our monthly Fair Housing and Power Hour series. and we're proud to bring this important topic to you from the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Would you advance my slide, please, Amanda? So we like to start out every training with reminding everyone that everyone has the right to fair housing. So advance me. So with that in mind, today's training, our goals are to provide an introduction to the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission for those of us who are not familiar with the PHRC, to identify relevant fair housing laws, our protected classes in Pennsylvania, and discriminatory practices, explain reasonable accommodations and modifications for individuals with disability, discuss assistant animals and fair housing, and answer your fair housing questions. They are the goals of today's training. Next slide. So, who are we? The Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. We have a two-part mission. We are Pennsylvania's civil rights enforcement agency here since 1955. We have a two-part mission, and that is one, to enforce Pennsylvania non-discrimination laws, which are the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act and the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act. The second part of our mission is to promote equal opportunity for all in Pennsylvania. On this slide, and we've newly updated it, if we see, go back one.
Sorry.
That's okay. So on this slide, this is our newly updated slide, we have recently redefined our coverage areas. But what's important to know about this slide, Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission is about 90 employees serving 13 million Pennsylvanians. And this is a little bit of how we break that up. You can see on the right-hand side of our slide, we have our Philadelphia area, and you can see how that reaches from the bottom to the top of the state. And that area is covered by our Philadelphia regional office. In the center, in the light blue, that is our Harrisburg regional office. We also have a central administrative office in the Harrisburg area. And in the dark blue, on the left-hand side of the state, you'll see everything served by our Pittsburgh regional office. This is how we filter out complaints when they come in generally. This is how we decide where complaints are investigated geographically, with some exceptions. Thank you. So non-discrimination laws in Pennsylvania that I mentioned earlier. The Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, to give you more background, that is covering employment, housing, commercial property, public accommodations, primary and secondary education. The discrimination laws are rounded out further by the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act, which extends those laws to post-secondary education. Next slide. More about fair housing laws. So goals of our fair housing, the goals of fair housing are number one, to end housing discrimination. And the second goal of fair housing laws is to promote diverse, inclusive communities, otherwise known as affirmatively furthering fair housing. Next slide. So what do fair housing laws cover? The sale and rental of housing, housing-related transactions, which some people do not realize, and the types of housing that are important to point out: apartments, single-family homes, manufactured housing communities, condominiums, public housing, nursing homes, dormitories, and sometimes shelters are covered under fair housing laws. Responsible parties are property owners, managers, municipal officers, and officials, lenders, realtors, and more. And there are two theories. The discrimination theories covered under the law: disparate treatment, which is treatment that directly discriminates against a member of a protected class, or disparate impact, a policy that impacts a member of a protected class. Next slide. So an overview of fair housing laws. At the federal level, we have the Fair Housing Act of 1968 and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and also the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act of 1990. In the state, as I mentioned, we have the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, and there are also local housing laws that you would need to check your local ordinances because there may be further laws. Housing jurisdiction. So, what is our jurisdiction? The FHA covers housing providers with 4 or more properties unless they publicly advertise vacancies or receive federal funding. And the PHRA, it's important to note that in Pennsylvania, housing providers with 1 or more properties is what the PHRA covers. So it's somewhat tighter than the federal protections. There's differences in the filing timelines as well. On the federal level, a complaint must be filed within 365 days of the date of the last harm. In Pennsylvania, the complaint must be filed within 180 days of the last date of harm for the PHRC. Next slide. So our next slide is you can see the protected classes on the federal level. There's race, color, national origin, familial status, religion, sex, disability. You can see that on the state level, Pennsylvania Human Relations Act covers those and more, adding age protections for 40 and above, ancestry, use, handling, or training of support animals for disability, and religious creed. Next slide, please. So familial status, to define that a little more, how that's different. Families with children under the age of 18 living with parents or legal custodians. It covers pregnant persons, and it covers people securing custody of children under the age of 18. So it would include foster children. Next slide. Sex. So sex as a protected class under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. So why LGBTQ plus is not considered to be protected class under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. PHRC finalized regulations in 2023 that established that the term sex may refer to pregnancy status, childbirth status, breastfeeding status, sex assigned at birth, gender identity or expression, affectional or sexual orientation, differences in sex development. These regulations are utilized by this commission to accept complaints, to conduct investigations, and to adjudicate cases. And you can learn more when we share the slides. There is a link to more resources. Next slide, please. So next, we'll talk about disability. Disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of a person's major life activities. Examples of that would be caring for oneself, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, and or working. Fair housing laws protect those who have a disability, who have a history of a disability, or who are regarded as having a disability. Exemptions. There are some exceptions, and that would be an individuals who are currently using illegal drugs. They are exempt from disability-related protections, but this does not include those who are in active recovery. Another exemption would be an individual who poses a direct threat to the health or safety of others. They are also exempt from the disability-related protection. Next slide, please, Amanda. So what is a discriminatory action? So obviously discriminatory statements, discriminatory inquiries, steering, refusal to lease, sell, or finance housing, unfair appraisals, predatory lending, discrimination in housing terms or conditions, unequal provisions of services and facilities, sexual harassment, and refusing to provide a reasonable accommodation or modification. So with that, for instance, steering, that would be sometimes these discriminatory actions aren't so obvious. Sometimes they could be a lot more subtle, or even sometimes a housing provider may have good intentions, but when they communicate to the tenant, they could be guilty of a discriminatory action. So for instance, you making statements like it's by a synagogue or it's near a playground or making any kind of statement like that could be considered a discriminatory action. So I just wanted to point out that that could be something subtle. So disability related protections. So I would want to pause here and ask for everyone to pop into the chat who would like to participate. What percentage in housing do you think the complaints PHRC receives would be disability? So if you've attended one of our trainings before and know the answer to this, you can refrain. But I'd like to see in the chat what people think. How much of that is disability? Oh, Kimberly, 75%. Wow.
80, 70, 30, 70,
Ooh.
53.
For those of you old enough to remember The Price is Right, we'll see who's closest without going over. Does anyone remember that? Let's pop onto the next slide, Amanda, and see the answer. So
Mm,
48%. Do we have a winner?
It's like Pam Lambert, 40%.
Way to go, Pam. So you are very close. Someone had 53%. I noticed that was also very close. Right. So yeah, we don't have the showcase wheel to spin, but figuratively, congratulations on that. Yes, and seriously, I was happy to see in this group there were a lot of high percentages guesstimated, or in hypothesis, and that's a good sign because it shows me that our group is aware that people with disabilities are discriminated against frequently. And I'll let you know in case you're not aware, because I know we have some internal folk on. But disability is not only our number one type of complaint in housing across the board in education, public accommodation, compliance, employment, commercial property. It is our number one complaint overall. But I can give you the statistic that it makes up 48% of our complaints in housing. Next slide. So reasonable accommodations and modifications. In addition to the protections we covered so far, individuals with disabilities may also request reasonable accommodation or a modification that are needed to use and enjoy their housing. So with that, I would like to go on to the next slide and just explain a little bit about the difference. So a reasonable modification is a structural change that you would make to a premises, and a reasonable accommodation is a change, an exception, adjustment to a rule, policy, practice, or service. So if we would take to the chat again for just a moment, we'll hit reasonable modifications first. Could can anyone share what their idea of a reasonable modification looks like? And I'll leave the definitions up here for us to refer to. So we're going to talk about modifications first. Excellent. Wow. I could see some of them. Widening a hallway, railings. Yes. Excellent. Awesome. Yes. Everyone hit that right on the head, that nail right on the head. The modifications are structural. So raising or lowering a countertop, wheelchair ramp, grab bars and showers. Very good to see that people on our training are aware of what needs are for people with disabilities. I'm glad to see modification was 100% correct. Let's take to accommodation. What would a reasonable accommodation be? So remember, this is adjustment to a rule, policy, practice, or service. So can anyone think of what some examples of that might be? Any ideas? Can you see? Yeah, Amanda can help me out
We've
here.
got
Yeah.
we've got pets, contracts in larger print. We have service animals, change of parking spaces or reserved parking, first floor apartment for someone with a mobility impairment, additional time to complete paperwork, flexible working hours, moving to a lower floor, something in Braille.
Oh, nice. Very, very great, very good. And thank you for helping me there, Amanda. I can visualize, can't visualize the chat as quickly. That's wonderful, Brill. I liked also, that was one that we don't hear a lot when we're doing training, printing the contracts larger. As everyone sees my readers today, I getting to the point where I used to just need them for paperwork. Now I'm using them all the time. So yeah, I would appreciate something like that, definitely. And these are sometimes very small changes. Another example of a reasonable accommodation is, say, someone has relies on Social Security or disability check. A reasonable accommodation might be to change their rent due date so they can be on time with their payments. Next slide, please. So reasonable modifications. It's discriminatory to refuse to allow a person with a disability permission to modify and pay for the changes to enable them to use a facility. A housing provider may require residents to restore the interior to the original condition at the end of the tenancy, minus wear and tear. So maybe something like grab bars would be something that the uh, housing provider may leave in place when someone vacates the property. However, something like lowering cabinets for someone to use a wheelchair, that might be something that the housing provider wants restored. No, this is important. If a housing provider receives federal funds, they are required to pay for the modification, not the tenant. But otherwise, the tenant pays for the modifications, and it's discriminatory not to allow them to do so. So examples of not allowing would be not allowing a resident to install grab bars in a bathroom, not allowing a resident to have a wheelchair ramp constructed. So next slide. It is reasonable accommodation. So it's discriminatory to refuse to make a reasonable accommodation in rules, policies, practices, or services necessary to afford equal opportunity for a person with a disability to use and enjoy their housing accommodations. So you can see the examples there, not allowing a person with a disability income to pay their rent, which we spoke about, not designating reserved parking for all individuals with disabilities who need it to access their housing, which someone brought up in the chat earlier, not allowing a person with a disability to have a service animal when there is a no pet policy, and not adjusting zoning policies to allow for a group home or individuals with disabilities. Next slide.
Now, we did have a question.
Oh,
So
sure.
if a tenant is in a scattered site unit with federally paid housing assistance, the landlord must pay for the modification?
Could we address it at the end of the presentation, just so I can look at it? If they receive federal funding for the housing, then the landlord would. I'm not sure that I can't see the chat. Maybe if I could read it.
Sure.
Right. If they receive federal funding, they have to pay for the modification. That's correct. I'm sorry. I did see how to pull up my chat. So hopefully it didn't modify my screen. Is my screen still okay?
Yep, I can see the slides for handling a reasonable accommodation request.
Okay, perfect. So just pull me back over to the chat if you need, if there's further questions. I'm going to restart my own slides so I can continue. So thank you for your question. That was a great question. So So how do we handle reasonable accommodation requests? The request can be made at any point in the tenancy. So a person does not have to reveal that they have a disability, or an exacerbation happens of someone's disability that they, might have had in remission, or it might have been latent when they sought the housing contract. So it can be made at any point in tenancy. The request can be made in writing, and we strongly recommended that, but it is not necessary. It's important to note that these requests can be verbal. The request needs to be reasonable and necessary for the resident to use and enjoy the property. And the housing provider has the responsibility to treat residents making these requests fairly and respond in a timely manner. Can't stress enough how important it is for the housing provider to engage in that interactive process, and it must be timely. So reasonable accommodations. So it's discriminatory to refuse to make the accommodations. We covered that. Okay, timely manner. Next slide, please. There we go. So requesting documentation. How does a housing provider do this in a non-discriminatory way? When presented with a reasonable accommodation request, a housing provider should establish two criteria. Does the person seeking the accommodation fall under the protected class of disability? And does that person have a disability-related need for the accommodation? So if the answers to both of these are yes, what do you think? Should they grant the accommodation? Next slide. Yes, grant the accommodation. Next slide. So what can a housing provider do when it comes to documentation? So they can ask for proof of need, but only if that disability is not observable. You're not going to ask someone who uses a wheelchair, or something that's apparent, for proof of their disability. A medical note of need, and they can ask for that for a non-apparent disability, but it's important for the housing provider to know this does not have to be from their primary care doctor. It can be from a nurse, a therapist, a counselor. They can use alternative documentation establishing the disability. So, in other words, if they get a determination of disability benefits from a government agency, receipt of disability benefits and services, or eligibility for housing assistance because of a disability, then the housing provider can be assured that those agencies did their due diligence in establishing that that person has a disability. So they can use that for alternative documentation. So when you receive the slides, there's more. There's another link here for you to learn more. Next slide. Okay, so what's reasonable? Assessment of reasonableness is on a case-by-case basis. Very important that this is individualized. So factors to consider: the cost of the accommodation requested, the financial resources of the provider, the benefits of the requested accommodation to the person making the request, and the availability of alternatives to the accommodation requested. Is there something that would work as well that would be more readily available to the housing provider or less expensive? Next slide. So let's talk about what a housing provider, why they can deny a request. So if the needed documentation isn't provided, then they do not have to grant the request. If the specific request poses a direct threat to the health and safety of other people, if the request would cause substantial physical damage to the property, if the request would place an undue burden on the provider, or if the request would fundamentally alter the nature of the provider's operation. They are all grounds for denying the request. Next slide. So I mentioned briefly the interactive process, and this is so important. And we see when a housing provider fails to engage in the interactive process, that that can be a real problem for them. So if the reasonable accommodation or modification request cannot be granted, the housing provider must then engage in an interactive process to assess if there's a reasonable alternative that meets this individual's disability related housing need. It must take place in a timely manner. Um, there's no set rule for when that should be, but timely. You wouldn't want that to go on for weeks and weeks. A matter of days, an email exchange, something that you are having a discussion. This may take some negotiation and conversation to determine an effective resolution, and that's fine, but it needs to be fully documented. Even if it's a verbal conversation, it's good to document that that conversation happened. And save that in the housing provider's records. And when they do document it, it's a good idea to send it to the tenant as well. Next slide. So what can't a housing provider do? Do not ask. Sometimes this is helpful in a way just to, because it's a short list here. So you may not ask the nature or severity of the disability, questions that lead the tenant to disclose privileged medical information. You cannot ask to see medical records, of course, and you cannot ask a tenant if they are able to live independently. Next slide. So reasonable accommodations and hoarding disorder. Let's move on. Very important. So hoarding disorder, what is it? So it's a mental disorder marked by an obsessive need to acquire and a failure to use or discard a significant amount of possessions, even if the items are worthless, hazardous, unsanitary. It is a perceived need to save items, distress with discarding them. It is an accumulation of possessions that congest and clutters active living spaces. It's clinically significant distress or impairment on social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. This is not attributable to another medical condition or explained by symptoms of another mental disorder. And the source for that is the DSM-5. Next slide. So some facts, because there's a lot of confusion and around hoarding disorder. And also you see television shows on the subject and so forth. So it's good that we have some facts on what hoarding disorder actually is. So approximately 2.5% of the population is hoarding disorder. According to a 2019 meta-analysis, both men and women are impacted by hoarding disorder, and this often emerges in adolescence and early adulthood, increasing with severity over time. There can be co-occurring conditions such as depression, ADHD, and OCD, although they know now that it was previously thought that this was an anxiety-driven disorder, maybe something coexisting, but it's a standalone. There's some unique things about hoarding disorder that we'll learn about further. Next slide. The impacts of hoarding. The individual has conflict with loved ones, health and safety risk, very important, unable to prepare and store food, unable to have people visit, risk of losing their housing and utilities shut off, financial problems, mental health problems, shame, embarrassment, defensiveness, stigma, and trauma. Because of a failure to be able, I hate to say failure, but the inability to let go of items. And many of us have a lot of stuff, and people have a lot of stuff. So how do we determine, what is clutter, what is a disorder? And often with hoarding, you see that it impacts the intended use of a room, or has the ramifications of what is going on. Can a person just not let go of it, or are they just too busy? Or do they have a disability? So what does it come down to? So we'll talk a little more about the impacts of hoarding, and again, think about what is hoarding actually. So impacts of hoarding on the landlords and neighbors. So disrepair, maintenance hazards, infestations can happen, and citations, but I think it's important to mention that not all hoarding is a sanitation issue or infestation issue. Although having a lot of possessions can make it difficult to clean and dust can accumulate, etc. Code enforcement, structural damage, blocked exits, citations, and condemnation. Emergency responders, very important that to note that some hoarding situations can be fire hazards, and then there's a lack of access for medical personnel to enter the home, especially with the safety issues that hoarding can create outside of fire hazards. Trips and falls. How are medical personnel going to get into the home and assist somebody who's injured? Health department, infestations, health hazards, senior services. Sometimes the person may fear having people in their home or reaching out for help because they may be fearful of being removed from their home. Also, senior services, when someone's discharged from the hospital and they do a home assessment, hoarding can come to light and create issues. Removal of children in child protective services, animal protective services. I know that we see that sometimes portrayed on television, that people can lose track of their animals and so forth. Next slide. So treatment and intervention. Effective treatment will likely involve a variety of professionals: case management, code enforcement, mental health providers. It's not as easy as coming in and cleaning out someone's home and what kind of anxiety and issues that could cause. Certainly, this is something that needs mental health treatment and case management to have this be successful for the person. This may look different by agency and community depending on the resources available in this specific community. Next slide. So here we see clutter. On the left-hand side, looks like a lot of, maybe if we have teenagers or children, what their room's going to start to look like. So there is a difference between clutter and what we see on the right-hand side of this screen is hoarding. And I would say that although the first room is disorganized, you can tell it's a bedroom being used for the intended use of a bedroom. It is hard to say what the intended use. We can see that is probably a kitchen. It is a kitchen from the cabinetry. I think on the border, it looks like it might be a refrigerator or cabinet, but certainly that room cannot be, there's some dishwashing liquid there. So that room could not be used for its intended use. It's definitely safe. Safety hazards. Next slide, please. So how do we make reasonable accommodations when hoarding is the issue? So under the FHAA, a person who has a hoarding disorder may be entitled to a reasonable accommodation of policies, practices, or services when such accommodations may be necessary to afford a person equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling. Next slide. Addressing hoarding best practices, what we should all know, and especially housing providers. A housing provider may enforce lease terms if it's the resident's responsibility to ask for help or reasonable accommodations. So that is something a housing provider can do. Prioritize, best practice, prioritize by safety first before the more cosmetic issues. If a resident has outside supports who can assist them with addressing the issue, invite the tenant to include them on the discussions in communication, and ensure that expectations are clearly defined for both parties and state what is expected and the outcomes of noncompliance. So be specific, to just say, well, clean this place up, maybe set, or this isn't safe, set some expectations, make sure that those priorities, as we said, around safety should be the priority, and that the expectation is clear, and realize that this may go in increments for the person due to their disability. So communicate in writing for clear records, and be conscious of the individual's attachment to items and use neutral language. The problem can be exacerbated, as we said, on those factors like stigma, shame, that can make the situation worse and shut down communication. Next slide. Addressing hoardings, establishing a plan. So set standards in specific areas, create a timeline for each step and a deadline to make it concrete, because people have different ideas of what is, neat. And again, we're not looking at the cosmetic as much as um, the safety of the situation. So establish who will do the removal, establish who will check the progress and how often, and it's good to have appointments set for that. Clearly communicate about what services tenant is utilizing, how have relevant releases on file of what you can share, and understand that this is a long-term issue and have a method to ensure permanent resolution to the problem. Next slide. Community resources. Resources are going to vary by community. If there are services or even agencies that specialize in assisting people with hoarding, they do exist, but they may not be available everywhere. Housing providers should start by talking with social service providers that are already assisting the tenant who's already present. United Way 211 may be a good place to begin a search for specialized services. PA Link to Aging and Disability Resources Network also may have resources, information, and initiatives. And there are several hoarding task force in PA that could serve as a model for developing a local task force. And they are listed below in Philadelphia, Allegheny County, and PA Link Regional. Next slide. So this is the clutter hoarding scale, or the CHS, and you can see it may be hard to see on the presentation. The print is small, but this is very helpful. And it's from the Institute for Challenging Disorganization. And you can see the levels are on the left side and move to the bottom and then across the top. What it means for structure and zoning, animals and pets, etc. So this will be shared in the slides and your resources after today's presentation. And also, again, there's a link for this resource as well. Next slide. So next we'll address competing disability needs. So granting reasonable accommodation requests can impact other residents, and hoarding is one of those situations where this has the potential to happen. If another resident voices disability-related concerns, it's important to work to resolve these issues through the interactive process. An example, a resident requests an ESA, but another resident discloses that they are allergic to a cat dander. If you're having trouble navigating those situations, please call the PHRC or reach out to one of the local fair housing agencies for help for navigating these complex situations. Next slide. The best practices for reasonable accommodation request. Remember that the housing provider should have an established policy. Document everything in writing, limit information request to what is needed to process the request, allow sufficient time for the documentation to be submitted. Respond in a timely manner. Again, remember I told you there is no law, but we recommend within 10 days to avoid the potential of not entering into the interactive process. And engage in interactive dialogue as well to meet the needs of the tenant. Next slide. The complaint process. So I'd like to take a few minutes to familiarize those of you who are not familiar with our complaint process. So if you or someone you know is feeling that they're experiencing discrimination, not only in housing, but in other fields, in other areas that we discussed that PHRC covers, again, please contact your regional office nearest you. Remember the map I showed you. in the beginning of the presentation, but you could call one of our regional offices and we will uh, field you to your appropriate regional office and talk a little bit about what happens at that point. You would talk to someone in intake, and uh, if they decide that it is jurisdictional and something we can definitely help with, or we will decide through intake. That will be the intake will questionnaire. You will fill out a questionnaire and work with an intake person, and then you will be signed an investigator. And the process. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So I knew that I had a few points here I didn't want to forget. So if the person believes they have experienced housing discrimination or any kind of discrimination, you can contact our intake team, and that would be through those numbers that I showed you on the previous slide. You will fill out a housing questionnaire, provide your contact information, what you experienced, and who you are filing the complaint against. We cannot take anonymous complaints. So we need to have a complainant and who you are filing against. The intake team will assess their information to see if it's a situation we can help with and investigate under the state law. If the complaint is jurisdictional and timely, we will help you finalize your complaint, and the person who the complaint was filed against will be notified. Next slide. So now we enter into the investigation process, where I mentioned that after intake, it is assigned to an investigator. So at this point, you'll be asked to provide information to a neutral investigator who is responsible for investigating if there is a violation of the Pennsylvania Human Relation Act. This investigator may ask for discovery. Okay, so that's documents, interview witnesses, and request to hold a fact-finding hearing or seek other ways of obtaining evidence. We have a robust mediation department, and we will offer those mediation services if they're an option, depending on the case and if both parties agree to mediation. An investigator will also explore if there is a possible way to settle the case before a finding. Next slide. So the finding, there are two possibilities. If the case proceeds to a finding, the two possible outcomes are probable cause or no probable cause. So if probable cause is found, we are no longer neutral. Okay, so the case may be conciliated, advanced to public hearing, or even be filed in court. At this point, the goal is to seek a remedy for the discrimination that occurred. The amount of time it takes to investigate a case, we get this question a lot, it does vary. It depends on the type of case, the type of evidence, the speediness of the response, and other factors. Next slide. Potential housing case remedies. So what can we do in housing? We can, the remedy can be that the reasonable accommodation or modification is made. Changes to the lease and other policies can happen. Posting of fair housing notices, training for respondents, reimbursement of fees and out-of-pocket expenses, money for humiliation and embarrassment in housing, that is a remedy, and civil penalties. Next slide. Some recent housing awards that we can share with you. You can see 1.5 million, and that was because a housing provider failed to provide accessible units and ignored requests for the reasonable accommodations for tenants with disabilities. They didn't enter into the interactive process even. So $100,000, maintenance workers sexually harassed a female tenant. $90,000, housing provider revoked a lease and failed to address neighbor harassment based on race. $77,000, the housing provider made discriminatory statements and refused to rent to a household based on familial status. Next slide. So here at Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, we have a multitude of fair housing resources. We have free housing training programs, and on our website, you can see a list of all of the training programs that we offer. We offer them for one person or for the general public. We can if you make a training request on our website, we can work with you to modify the training to your needs, or you can choose from our catalog of trainings that we have. We do them in person, or we do them in the virtual space like today. So we have monthly housing webinars, Fair Housing and Power Hour, as we are on today, as we're all well aware. We have a multitude of updated and very comprehensive brochures and fact sheets that you can request and we'll mail out to you. We have PHRC Speak on PC Speaks, PHRC Speaks on PCN. So that is Fair Housing Forward, and that is our cable television show. We have actually a program very recently that's on YouTube. They're reposted on YouTube. It was the Empower Hour, and we had guests speaking on hoarding. So that may be something our audience today wants to take advantage of. That recent, I don't believe it was just a few weeks ago, Fair Housing and Hoarding. So there's a further resource for from PHRC that you can look into. And that was hosted by our own outreach coordinator, Brittany Mellinger, who many of you are familiar with, as she usually hosts our Empower Hours. We have our State of Fair Housing in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania white paper that we are in the process of updating, but it is available online and still, and we have hard copies that we would be happy to mail out. We are updating it, and you can look forward to that release late summer. But the white paper is still very relevant and very useful resource for that I would highly recommend our audience to obtain. Next slide. So right now, you can see we can have some time for questions if anyone has any questions, or if there's some in the chat. But before you do that, you can see the QR code to scan and survey today's training. That feedback helps us provide better training and better and a more variety of topics that are of interest to our viewers and our partners across the state, and anyone who does enjoy our trainings here at PHRC. There is our central office contact information. My email address is different. You will see this coming in. I didn't catch this to update it. It's Caroline Griffin, Director of Fair Housing, and my email address is updated as well. And if you can throw that in the chat, Amanda, I would really appreciate it, or send it along after. And then please contact the PHRC. Our Fair Housing line is not available at this time, but you can contact the PHRC with any questions. You can email OC Mellinger, myself, or one of our general lines. So I thank you for your time today. It's been great to meet with you. And I thank Amanda for her help today. Thank you, Amanda Martin. And also our ASL interpreters and our captioners. And I thank all of you.
I'll just give it a few seconds here to see if we have any questions in the chat. I'm not seeing any questions. That's a lot of thank yous. As always, just send your questions through to the email address or give us a call. We'll be happy to answer those.
Yes, and look for our slides and in your email. We will be providing them. Usually it doesn't take more than 24 hours. So thank you, everyone.
All right. Have a great day. I'm going to go ahead and close this out then.
Thank you.